Hello everyone. This is a recording of the first lecture of the network security course. This is an introductory lecture where I'm going to talk about a few concepts, starting with the introduction of definitions of network security and its relationship with the information security in general, then some concepts of threats, motivation of hackers, hacking process, and other concepts as well. All right, so let's talk about information security in general and network security in particular. Okay, so network security, according to the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, is the measures taken to reduce the susceptibility of a network to external and internal threats. Okay, so the we understand that information security is a general concern. Network security in general is considered important because the network is being used most of the time as the means uh, to get to networks, to infiltrate and get to the data, right? So it's the passageway. So we need to secure the network in order to prevent it from being used as means to get to the information, which is usually what the hackers are after. So in that case, network security is concerned mostly uh, about protecting the network service in general. So the transport service, as well, the network is a transport service. So we need to protect that so that we um, prevent the hackers from using it maliciously. Um, to reduce the susceptibility of end systems and applications to threats originating from the network itself, and finally to protect the data during transmission across the network. Right. So if I want to put it in the context, if we talk about information security in general, so we need to protect information, which I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But when we focus on network security in particular, we want to make sure that any threats are not using the network or originating from the network. Right? All right, so in order to secure the network, we want to put physical environmental safeguards to protect the equipment, the network equipment itself, and the media that it uses. We need to enforce and implement technical controls within the network infrastructure to make sure that it's not susceptible to threats. We need to put controls in the life cycle of the infrastructure itself, again, to limit its vulnerability. Life cycle, by life cycle processes, we mean, you know, from the provision, like putting a switch or configuring a switch or router or any other equipment, from the provisioning stage to the operation stage to eventually getting rid of the hardware and replacing it. So that's a life cycle process, right? And that applies to other things as well. Provisioning a link, taking down a link. So everything has a life cycle. And we want to make sure that um, we have controls, we have measures to limit any vulnerability during the life cycle of any piece of infrastructure. And also, we need to make sure that we have operations that can detect, contain, and respond to any security incidents. Again, that's what network security safeguards from the concept of or from the perspective of Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Okay, so Well, let's go back a little bit and talk about security in general, network security and information security in general, right? So, what is information security? And what are the main objectives of information security? The three main objectives of information security are known as the CIA: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality is the objective of ensuring that the data is not intentionally or unintentionally disclosed to anyone without authorization. So this means that the information is only available for those who are authorized to access the information or the data. And there is this unintentional, so we don't really limit information security to the intentional or the malicious act, but also we want to make sure that's not being disclosed unintentionally. A lot of problems happen sometimes by reckless or careless manipulation of data or processing of data. So when usually the security part try to prevent the intentional and the unintentional disclosure of information. The other objective is the integrity. Integrity means that the data is not being changed unintentionally or again unintentionally, right? So the information not necessarily always being hidden. Sometimes the information can be public, but we want to make sure that it's not changed. The general example that I give all the time is, let's say I sent an email to the class saying we have an exam at on Thursday at 8:30 a.m., right? So that's public information. That's not encrypted. Everybody sees it. But integrity here means that I want to make sure that nobody goes to that email and change the content and make the time 9:30 instead of 8:30. So by changing one character, right, or one number, and making sure or the result of this change is everybody comes to the exam late, right? So that's what we mean by integrity, making sure that the information is not being changed. And the third objective is availability, making sure that the information system in general and the data resources in general are available when we need them, right? And when we need to access them, they are always available, right? So these three are the main objective of security, of information security. And they will be our main objective of network security in particular. All right, there are other objectives. They all stem from the three main ones. Authentication, we talked about was authorized access to information. So how do we ensure authorized access to information? We need to make sure that we have authentication and authorization. These are the two objectives here. Authentication is the proof of somebody's identity, right? So if we want to make sure that the information is accessed by only authorized people, first of all, we want to make sure that whoever accessed the information is actually the person, the person who claims to be, right, and not somebody else who is masquerading or spoofing. And sometimes we talk about persons in general, but sometimes we want to make sure that systems are authenticated as well. So an application wants to access a database, we want to make sure that that application is the right application, right? So authentication refers to verifying the identity not just for persons but for programs and processes as well. Authorization also, authorization comes usually before the authentication. Authorization making sure that the process, or the user is actually given the authority to access, or given the right to access this information. Authorization is given by the organization, right? So an instructor is authorized to access a user or students' scores, students' grades. So that's authorization. Who gives the authorization? The organization, the faculty, the university, right? The school, because somebody who has to provide authorization to that, to the staff or to the instructor. Okay, non-repudiation is the service that prevents user from denying having performed an action. The example is, okay, so I'll send a message saying the exam is on Thursday at 8:30, and you receive it and you prepare for the exam, and you come at 8:30 and I say, no, I didn't say there is an exam, or the exams actually started at 8 and you are 30 minutes late. So that's denying that I sent the information. Imagine also I sent instructions to the bank that to transfer the money from one account to another, and then later I said, no, I didn't send the instructions, so I deny, or the user denies having performed an action. So one of the security objectives is to make sure that people who send or perform any action, they don't come back later and deny that action. And finally, privacy. Privacy is associated with confidentiality as well. Privacy protects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personally identifiable or sensitive data, right? So, for example, for students, their grades, they want to keep this information private to themselves, and nobody else, no colleagues can see them. Only authorized people. Maybe you want to apply for a job and they want to see your transcript, so that's okay. You authorize those people to see your grades, but not everybody else. So you need to keep your information private. Your medical record, you want to keep them private. Your sometimes your address, home address, you want to keep it private. So any information that you want to keep private, not just personally, but sometimes organization needs to keep their future plans private. So that aspect of networks of information security deals with privacy issues. Okay, there is a slide that I skipped here, so I'll go back to this. We deal with trust when we deal with information security in general, and that applies also to network security. So what is the concept of trust? Okay, let's go back to the authorization. The university, the faculty, the department gives me authorization to access student information, including grades, right? Now, the assumption here is that I'm trusted as an instructor to deal with this information according to my job, right? So I am supposed to access the score, update them, change them according to the exams, according to the classwork and all of that. If I go and start manipulating grades without any legitimate reason, then I am violating this trust, right? Let me give you another example. An employee deals with customer information, and the employee deals with a lot of sensitive information about customer accounts, projects, financial information, and instead of dealing with this information diligently, she leaks this information to a third party, a competitor, for example. All right, so now she's violating the trust given to her. All right. So trust is an integral concept in security. Without trust, well, we cannot operate, right? We cannot operate. The students will not trust the instructors. The employers, the customers do not trust the employees. So we need to manage trust. So what is trust, or um, how we establish trust? We can establish trust in many ways. All right. So if I know somebody for a long time, then there is a trust developed, right? So I know this person, regardless of being friend or not friends. But if I work with colleague for a long time, and there is a mutual relationship, mutual trust that develops over time. So if comes to me and say, can I borrow $10 from you? I didn't bring my wallet today and I wanna buy lunch. I would say, okay, I'll give you $10, and I trust that person to bring $10 to me back later on. All right. So that's an example of trust. It develops over time. But there are also kind of trust that develops using laws and regulations, right? So um, if I'm driving and I have to follow the rules of the road, I have to follow the laws. I stop at stop sign, I stop at red light and move at green light, and I trust that everybody else who's driving follow the same rules. If the rules break, if somebody doesn't follow rules, what happens? Accidents happen. So in this case, the trust comes from a system, and the system uh, put the rules and puts also uh, punishments for not following the rules. Another type of trust comes by relying on a third party, right? So again, somebody comes to me and say, give me $10. Or can I borrow $10 from you? I'll give them back to you tomorrow. Now, I don't know that person, so most likely I won't give them $10, right? But if some my friends vouches and say, no, I know this person, don't worry, I guarantee that he will give you your money back tomorrow. So now I put my trust on this third party, my friend, who says, no problem, you can give that money to that person, even though you don't know him, and I guarantee that he will give you money back. So all these kind of different systems of trust that we rely. I gave you examples, but in networking security and information security in general, we see these type of trusts. Um, the system trust or the laws trust happen if you are using operating systems. There are type of rights and access permissions that given to users at different levels. So that's the system that, or the rules that guarantee people are, or users acting according to rules, right? So this is an example. Another example of a third party trust is the digital certifications that we use almost all the time, right? Nowadays, every time you go and visit a website, you are actually using a digital certificate, a secure website, using HTTPS. You are using a digital certificate that guarantees that you are accessing a legitimate website, not a fake one, and that is guaranteed by a third party, right? So we use all these concepts of trust in information security. All right, another concept that we need to understand is the concept of assets. What are the assets? Assets are anything that we need to protect. Usually, we want to protect what's the most sensitive and most valued in information security, which is the information itself, is data. But sometimes we also need to protect systems. We need to protect servers. We need to protect cables. We need to protect links. So anything that's important uh, or significant to the organization is considered as an asset. Right? You are putting a website. You are putting um, a camera, security camera, right? Um, or a wireless access point. You don't want this camera or a wireless access point to be stolen. So for you to guarantee that the system, which is the networking system in this case, to guarantee that's working without a problem, you need to protect uh, that asset, the network camera, from being stolen, right? Um, any violation or any violations of network security affects the assets. It can be affect the assets physically by stalling them. It can affect them by copying information. It can affect them by leaking the information. Um, so usually, what we need to do is to prevent these things from happening. Is prevent compromising the assets, and this is exactly what the hackers do. They try to launch attacks to either steal the assets physically or virtually. All right, so for the next part of this lecture, we're going to talk about hackers and their motivations and what drives them. Okay, so usually the bad guys are the hackers, right? Those who are trying to steal the information or try to compromise the information system generally. Um, Hackers can be any type of person, or they come in different shapes and sizes, so to speak. So the hacker can be just somebody who's trying to prove something, right? Trying to prove her or his skills and just wants to show off, right? I know something that nobody else knows, so I'm gonna prove it so that I can see or kind of show that I can do things. All right, these usually are benign. They don't, but they are annoyance, right? So you don't want people to just disrupt the work just to prove that they're good. Um, and that's actually the original source for the name hacker. It used to be something like somebody who's maybe skilled, smart. Uh, they know operating systems well. They know networking well, and they want to just show off. And um, uh, or they just wants to seek a challenge. You tell them not to do something, and they want to do it just to you know. Just because you didn't tell them or you told them not to do it, right? um, these are but that's the original hackers. But then people start making financial gains from hacking. They start making financial gains from leaking information. They can steal information, credit card information, for example, and sell it. They can steal sensitive data from a company plans and they sell it to the competitor. So it becomes financially lucrative for hacking, and now we start seeing hacking being done at wide scale and mainly for financial reasons, but also there are other reasons sometimes for political reasons, sometimes um, for I don't want to say good reasons, but we have these hacktivists, the term hacktivist, which are, the mix between hackers and activists. They disrupt maybe um, a plant to show or uh, because they object of their environmental effect, right? So they hack a plant and disrupt its operation because they think the company is doing something bad for the environment. So we call these hacktivists. Uh, but anyways, so regardless of the motivations, they are all bad, and we're trying to protect the network uh, from these people. Hacking comes in different shapes and forms, but usually the hackers are after data. That's the most important thing, especially the hackers who are trying to gain or get some financial gains. If you are doing hacking for political reasons or military reasons, then probably you're not after data in particular, but you are going after the infrastructure. You want to destroy the infrastructure, or you want to disrupt the infrastructure. So that's a different type, and that affects the availability. We talked about the three pillars of information security, and availability is one of them. So if we start going after infrastructure itself to prevent it from operating, then we're talking about or we're affecting availability here. We're not going after data, but we are going after the infrastructure itself. Okay, so if the goal of the hackers is information or money, then they're actually most likely are going after some information that they can transfer to money easily. Right? And one of these things are credit card information and bank accounts, especially credit cards. If I steal credit card information, I can immediately go and start buying something using the credit card numbers. Okay? So that's easily transferable into cash or into merchandise, right? Hacking into bank accounts also, you get access to bank accounts. You can transfer money from one bank account to another. So something less transferable to money is stealing sensitive information and trying to sell it, right? Um, Hackers could simply go after email addresses for the university. Why is it that important to get email addresses? Because they can sell it to spammers, and the spammers that can bombard you with ads, and they can use the email accounts to actually do more harm by sending you malicious software that we're going to talk about later. So usually these are the targets of hackers. Um, but we see more and more hackers are going for long-term effects, not just stealing money or stealing credit card and buying something quick. And that's actually more dangerous form of hacking. And we're going to talk about it later. So instead of trying to steal information right away, they infiltrate companies, they infiltrate infrastructure, and they start collecting information over a long time, doing spying, right? So doing spying for different reasons, for financial reasons, you are spying on a company to and sell information to competitors, so that you can find long-term plans and you can, develop plans to compete with that company. Right? Steal secret formula. Um, do any time steal private information like medical history, to harm somebody, or to leak information, or to sell it to third party who are interested, right? So these usually are long term. Hackers take their time, infiltrate the organization, the target organization, slowly, and take their time, right? Threats usually come, or we think about them as they come from the outside. They come historically, um, from the outside. Somebody comes from the outside trying to steal information about a company, about credit cards, about emails. But um, statistics show that 2/3 come from outsider, 2/3 of the violations. But there is also 1/3, which is a significant number when you think about it, comes from the inside, comes from employees by who violate their trust that we talked about, right? So the employees who are um, authorized to access information, they go and leak that information. Um, Sometimes employees, why the employees do this, or why the people in trust they do this for multiple reasons. Sometimes to get financial gains, that's one, but sometimes they just seek revenge, right? Employees are not happy with the way being treated, or they think that they are denied some some rights, so they go and take revenge, right? Somebody gets fired, so in their way out, they just go and disrupt the network services, or they steal information, or they destroy a service, or they wipe hard drive, or they do anything. And this is actually probably the most dangerous, because they have the keys, they have the means, they have the knowledge. So that's actually more disturbing or more disrupting than the externals. There are also some people who may be a threat. They're not totally external, and they're not exactly employees, like contractors who and temporary workers who have limited work with the company, and but they gain some information, they gain some inside information while they're working for a company and organization, and that allows them to do harm after they finish the work, or take advantage of their temporary authorization to do harm. And sometimes people are just being opportunistic, right? It happens actually in reality. Sometimes people go around um, on the street, and they start checking if any cars are open. People may be too trusting, and they leave their car unlocked during the night, and just somebody goes around and try the doors, every car, and maybe out of 10 cars, one car is left unlocked. So they go around and steal whatever coins inside, or maybe they get lucky and they get some $10, $20. So that's an opportunistic. The equivalent in networking and information security is somebody who's exploits um, any vulnerability, or anything left unprotected. You leave a switch or a router that with a default username and password, admin. Somebody comes and tries, say, okay, let's see, admin, and it works because somebody forgot to change the username and password. So they log in and they do pretty much whatever they want, right? Um, so these are maybe um, hobbyist, opportunistic hackers who just seek the opportunity, right? Um, but the ones who are most scary and most the professional hackers who do this for a living, And these are becoming more and more like criminal organizations. They're not just one person in a basement trying to the common stereotype, right? Somebody wearing a hoodie sitting in a basement and um, uh, in front of a screen with a lot of code in it. These are becoming more and more well-funded criminal organizations who actually sometimes they sell their services to whoever, right? Whoever pays. This is an old um, slide from 2018, so now it's 5, 6 years old, but it shows the motivation behind cyber attacks. Ransomware is or has been on the rise since 41%. So ransomware is where you steal somebody or you encrypt actually somebody's information and say, well, if you want this information back, you have to give me money and I'll give you the code to decrypt the information back. Insider threat, employees, 27%, which is a high number here. Political reasons, 26%. Competition, these are companies competing with each other and trying to steal each other information, 26%. You notice here there is overlap, right? So they don't add up to 100, but cyber war between, so this is for military and purposes, or countries are fighting each other, 24%. Angry user, 20%, and others, 11%. And you can see here the pattern of attacks: denial of service, privilege misuse. We'll talk about these terms later. Lost and stolen assets. So these are different patterns, and these are different industries: education, finance, healthcare, information, manufacturing, public administration, retail, and so on. And the percentages. So the percentage of motive, the financial gains is 100% for accommodation. So accommodation is hotel and restaurants, right? So hotel and restaurants, so probably most likely people are going after credit card information, right? So because you go to a hotel, you give them a credit card, you go to a restaurant, you give them a credit card. So if the hacker attacks these establishments, most likely the motive will be financial. Anyway, you can see here mostly red here, which is espionage. If you look at the manufacturing, so they're going after information that gives them competition or competitive advantage. All right, so next we're going to talk about the hacking process. We talked about hackers. So what is the hacking process? All right, so the hacking process goes in one source that I used for this lecture. We go over 5 or 6 different stages. There are actually other sources that I will show you later that give you more recent articles show hacking process in 6 or 7 stages. But I think these will give us enough or good information about the process. So the process is the same whether we classify it into 5 stages or 6 or 7. They are still more or less the same. So you will see here that we start with reconnaissance, then scanning, enumeration, attacking, and then we differ at the end. The different sources call the last stages different names. So we'll start by the common ones. So what's reconnaissance? So before the hacker hacks, let's say, organization, they want to collect as much information as possible about the information. So we'll call this reconnaissance. And usually this happens sometimes offline. Sometimes you don't need to go to the network or to the internet to uh, collect this information. Sometimes you just need to gather information offline. But the internet is also another source. So what kind of information I need? All right, first of all, if I am hacking an organization, I need to know what's its public IP address, right? So I could do simple internet search, find their website, find their IP address. So that will be a reconnaissance mission to collect information. Another source of information is um, doing social engineering. Social engineering is the art and science of collecting information, sensitive, privileged information, by tricking people, right? Or sometimes just going around saying, well, you go to the receptionist of the organization and ask about the name of the CEO, or what is the name of the CEO of the company? Is they here right now? Do they have what is their schedule? Collecting information. Sometimes you need to trick people into giving information that's they're not supposed to be given, and sometimes the information is readily available. You just need to ask for it. There are a lot of um, tricks that people do to collect information about sensitive information. Imagine a FedEx employee or a FedEx or a hacker wearing uniform like a FedEx employee and bringing a package that looked like a FedEx package and going to a receptionist and say, "Oh, I have delivery to the CEO. Can you please direct me to their office?" Right? Or maybe something like uh, uh, the receptionist say, "Oh, there's a package for John. Oh, okay. Leave it at at the desk. I'll give it to them or to him later." So now the fake FedEx employee knows that the name of the CEO is John. Anyway, a lot of examples. You see spam all the time, or you see phishing email all the time. So emails comes and say, well, your bank account has been disabled for security reasons. Before, just send us an email to reactivate it as soon as possible. So now you're sending them back email, so they get your email address, the legitimate one. The first one probably was just a phishing attack. They're sending spam to everyone, but once you are responding, you they know this email is legitimate, and probably you gave them some other information like your name, or even worse, your bank account information. So that's all kind of social engineering tricks. Dumpster diving. This is a term where actually people go to the trash and look for information. Right? What can you find in trash? Documents that being discarded, maybe torn apart, but not completely, so they can be put back by tape. Even sometimes even documents that are shredded but not shredded, not shredded um, small enough so they can be put back and the information can be gathered. Old files, anything that maybe um, organizations carelessly put in the trash and they didn't really care about it. That's why we talked earlier about life cycle, and we'll talk later in other lectures about life cycle of data. So the life cycle of data starts from the creation of data until it's being thrown away. in one way or another. So you are putting a hard drive. There is an old hard drive. Maybe it's not even working anymore, and you trash it, you throw it. But that hard drive can be recovered. The information can be recovered. So uh, you need to, or a proper um, protection of the data includes also destroying the hard drive properly, right? Not just throwing it in the garbage. You can gather information from public sources like the domain name management or search services. If you want to know the name of the administrator of um, the organization, or the name of the internet administrator of the organization, you may go and find this is a public information. If they have a public IP address, most likely the information is of the administrator is publicly available. And I know that you need to pay extra money to make this information hidden, right? And anything that you can do non-intrusive, which means that we'll talk about later about passive hacking, um, where you collect information without disrupting anything. So all of this is reconnaissance, and the idea behind reconnaissance is to collect information, not do any harm yet, but just collect information. The next step is actually doing something more active. All right, so now you get the IP address of the um, organization. What do you do next? All right, so maybe once I have the IP address, I will see what's behind it. A server, okay. Multiple servers, okay. I need to scan the IP address. If it's an IP network, a network address, then I want to scan the entire network to see what are the active nodes behind this network or inside this network. If it's a server, I want to see what ports are open. Maybe they have a web interface, web server, so port 80 is open. Um, they have RDP active, so maybe another port is open. So I want to find out, the hacker wants to find out what are ports are open, what are the vulnerable, what are the operating systems that the organization use. Right. Knowing the operating system will lead us to know, okay, so if I know the user are using Windows 7 still, or Windows 11, or Windows 10. So I know specific vulnerabilities in Windows 10, so I can design my attack based on the vulnerabilities of Windows 7 or Windows 10 or Linux of different flavors. So that's scanning techniques include um, different ones: word dialing, word driving, ping sweeps, and port scanning. I mentioned these already. Um, Word dialing is an older terminology that refers to people who go and dial random numbers, hoping that somebody answers. Right, so you keep dialing random numbers, or maybe not so random. You start with 1, 2, 3, and see who answers. Once you answer the call, you know that there is a person behind that number. So now and they may even give you their names. So that's the similar technique can be used for networking by just driving around and looking at the wireless access points names, the SSIDs for the neighborhood. Some people have their names in the wireless access point SSID, the Wi-Fi SSID. So that's how you discover whose network it is, and you plan your attack accordingly. Um, so that's word driving, where you drive around and collect wireless information. Ping sweeps, you just ping the network and see echo replies coming back, so you ping the entire network range and see who replies. Especially that ICMP is active in most devices, so usually people don't deactivate ICMP, they don't deactivate echo and echo replies. So you get replies, and that indicates who's active. Port scanning is to go and look at for TCP/IP ports range from has a long range, a big range, so you can start pinging. Trying to find out which ports are open. If the administrators of a server, for example, are not careful, they may leave some ports open without actually using them, so they could be used to infiltrate the server. All right, so there are the ports, not just TCP ports, but ports in general. TCP or UDP ports can be open, closed, or filtered in a system. So a port is known to be open if it can respond to three-way handshake, right? So you can actually establish a TCP connection with that port. But they can be also if you send sync and immediately you get what is the term, finish, so it doesn't, so that's closed. It doesn't respond, right? It can be filtered as well. It can be filtered. The port can be filtered by a firewall, so you cannot reach it at all. So it can be open or closed or filtered. So you can find actually the status of a port by just scanning. And there are tools that do that. You don't need to be a hacker to scan a device. Scanning usually discoverable. We will see in this course tools and devices that can discover scanning. So if you constantly see a TCP establishment handshake attempt with port 80, then 81, then 82, then 83, then you know that somebody is trying to hack, right? Because normal devices don't go and try to establish a TCP connection with a big range of ports. A normal browser client will just try to establish a connection with port 80, and that's it, right? So scanning also very easily discoverable. Pings also discovered. If you start pinging the whole range of the network, you know that there is somebody is trying to scan the network. Scanning can be for good reasons. If you are doing network management and trying to figure out, if a device is down, so you may be doing a legitimate ping sweeps, but either way you can discover the scanning. Before I move on from this slide, I just want to go back and explain port open, closed, and filtered again. Just make sure that I said it right the first time. So port open is usually listening, and as I said, you can actually establish three-way handshake if it's TCP. So you can send SYN and you receive SYN acknowledge and all of that. So you can do a three-way handshake. If it's closed, then you get a reset. I think I said finish, but it's actually reset. So if you try to if you send sync to a closed port, it will reply with RST reset, so you cannot establish three-way handshake. A filtered port means that there is a firewall in between the client and the server, and the filter will just look at the port number and drops, so you don't get any response at all, not even a reset. So you don't get you don't get through. So these are the three different status of ports, right? All right, moving on. The next step in the hacker process is enumeration. All right, enumeration is now we need to know more details. So I did scanning. I figured out which ports are open, which ports are closed, which ports are, filtered. I need to know more. I need to know, for example, what is the operating system behind that IP address. All right. Port 80. So port 80 normally refers to HTTP, or HTTP uses port 80. HTTPS uses port 443, but sometimes port 8080 is used, or sometimes range 8000 in general is used for web services, right? So 8080, 8086, 8008, all of these ports can be used for HTTP and web services as well. So I want to discover what are the services, what are the applications behind it. Again, some other applications use different ports. So by discovering, I need to collect more information after the scanning, right? As I said earlier, by identifying the operating system, I know what are the vulnerabilities of the operating system. So every operating system has some clues, indicates. I can discover what the operating system sometimes just by looking at the TTL field of the IP packet. Every operating system has a default TTL. Some have the default 64, some have default 128. Just by looking at the TTL field of the IP, I can discover the operating system. Banner grabbing is sometimes, okay, I log into a device and the device doesn't log me in because I don't have a username and password, but it could simply send a message that says, this is the main gateway of organization XYZ. All authorized access will be prosecuted. Stay away, right? But this by itself is enough information. I can get enough information from this warning, right? So now somebody told me that this is a main gateway and this is the name of the organization, and maybe more information about the router itself. So this may be enough information to tell me how to hack this device. Now, there's always a balance between why do we need banner information? Maybe to make network management easier, or to make device management in general. If you are managing information infrastructure and you have a lot of servers and a lot of devices, so you probably need the banner to differentiate between devices. So you need, as an administrator, you need to differentiate between devices. So banner will give you information that's useful from the management perspective, but also it's a double-edged sword as well. So you may give too much information to hackers. So you have to balance between giving useful information for administration, or giving too much information for hackers. So, but banner grabbing is one of the activities that hackers do to get insights into the infrastructure. Anyway, so a lot of information that can be gathered, and in this case we call this enumeration. Enumeration means, counting the number of ways I can hack the system. Okay, I know the operating system, I know the vulnerabilities, I know what IP addresses I can use, I know what ports I can use. So I have a collection of information. Right. The next step will be the one that actually uh, where the hacker put all of this information into use, right? Attacking in most cases should be very brief, right? No robber will go inside the house and spend hours there, taking their time. They want to do it as quickly as possible. They want to go in, steal as much as they can, and get out before somebody discover them. Hackers will operate most of the time using the same concept, with the exception of the hackers who go for the long run, which we'll talk about later. But attacking usually takes a short period of time, uh, as much time we need to download the useful information or do the damage that we want to do. So I want to do this as quickly as possible, using whatever vulnerability was discovered before. Um, and this should be done quickly and should be hidden at the end. The attacker usually they try to hide their tracks once they're done. Right? Attacking at the attack phase, if you are going after money, going after sensitive information, you want to download this information and go away and hide your tracks as quickly as possible. But sometimes the attackers will use the attacking phase to do or to prepare for another stage. So that's what we will call here the post-attack activities or the fallback attacks. The terms are probably not indicative of the actual activities, but we will take them for now, right? So um, one of the things that attackers may do is, aside from stealing information, is to do more harm, right? Or try to prepare for more harm. One of these things is called privilege escalation. So I managed to get access to a user account, a regular user account. The regular user account, they don't have authorization to do a lot of things anyways, right? So a regular user account may not give me a lot of things to do as a hacker. So the next step I want to do is to actually go and get an administrator's privileges, root privileges in case of Linux. So this is what's called privilege escalation, which means I start by hacking a regular user, and then I use tools to gain access to a higher privileged user, administration user, which gives me access to more resources. So how do I do that? One way is to maybe put a keystroke logger. This is a type of malicious software that we'll talk about later. So the logger will keep listening to everything that the user types in the keyboard, and maybe at some point the user will use their administration password, right? So they put admin and they put password, and now the logger records the keystrokes. So the hacker comes back later and look at the logger file, and okay, so here we go. We have the password for the administration account. So the next time they will escalate, they will go and get an administration privileges. Right? They may put additional hacker tools that allows them to do other things, viruses, for example. Go scour storage looking for something that they can use, right? Some other user information, account numbers, anything that can be used for other activities. Right? At the end, they want to remove evidence. So everything is being logged, whether you care for it or not, everything you do, even Windows, Linux, they log a lot of activities. So if I log into my Linux account and I do stuff, the syslog will usually logs a lot of activities. If I want to hide my track, I will go and delete those logs. Delete those logs, so I hide um, the user login, for example, information. So I delete those those lines in the log, so I hide my activities. All right. Uh, there are a lot of attacks that we can look at. Denial of service, eavesdropping, breaking and entering, social engineering, malware, session hacking, man in the middle, SQL injection, website attacks, and many more, right? So we'll go over each one of them. We'll focus on some and we'll just go gloss over others, but we will go over most of these. All right, we'll start by talking about malicious software, which has been around for decades, probably since the 70s. Malicious software, or short malware for short, is any software that is not supposed or is doing harm rather than good, right? Or doing something that's not supposed to be doing in in um, in regular terms, right? So usually we use software to process data, do useful things, but people can create software to do harm as well. Erase hard drive, um, scramble data, send emails that are not supposed to be that contains information that's not supposed to be leaked, doing all type of things, right? So we'll put all of this software under one umbrella. We call it malware. There are many types of malware: virus, worm, Trojan horse, keystroke, loggers, which I talked about in a second ago, spyware, adware, rootkit, logic bomb, trapdoor, backdoor, dialers, URL injectors, exploits. All of these are types of malware. You can spend hours looking at each one of them, but we're going to take a look at some of them, right? Okay, so a virus is probably the oldest type of malware. It's called virus because it mimics the biological virus. Uh, Virus is usually dormant until they attach themselves to a live cell, right? Computer viruses act same thing. They are harmless piece of software until it's executed. Usually it's executed without the knowledge of the user. So how it's executed without the knowledge of the user? By actually attaching themselves to an application or file that the user activates, right? So virus is a harmful piece of software. It connects itself to, let's say, Microsoft Word, and every time you run Microsoft Word, you unintentionally execute the virus itself, so the virus will do whatever harm it does, right? So um, anything, anything harmful, anything that's designed for. There are many types of executables in Windows. Anything .com or .exe, it's executable. DDLs, device drivers, all of these are executables. But sometimes they attach themselves also to just regular files, right? You run Microsoft Word and then you run or you upload a doc file. The doc file may have macros. The virus is attaching itself to the macro. So you run the macro, the virus runs as well. All right, so that's one aspect of a virus similar to biological viruses. The other aspect is replicating. Uh, Also, viruses, as soon as they attach to a live cell, they start replicating themselves and attach themselves to another live cells and so on. Viruses, the computer viruses, are designed the same way. Once they activate, they replicate themselves. They attach themselves to another application. So instead of Microsoft Word, now they are attaching themselves to Microsoft Excel and so on and so on. So they replicate. So that makes getting rid of them a lot harder. So that's the infection part. Worms is a virus that can spread from a system to a system. Early days, computers are isolated devices. There are not many networks out there. There are not many. There are no networks actually. People are using computers at home. So the only way a virus can replicate is by replicating itself in the same device, and maybe eventually replicates itself to uh, a device that's mobile, like a floppy disk or something that you can move from one system to a system, so that how it spreads across multiple computers. Later, when networks became more common, so networks can be used by viruses to move or to replicate across devices. So we call them worms. Worms spread from a system to a system, and they can use remote procedure calls, RPCs, or they can attach themselves to emails. You send an email from one device to another, so you infect devices, right? Worms can also be used, and viruses as well. They can be used to deposit another harmful software. And a lot of attacks, I will say this right now and probably will repeat it later, a lot of attacks actually staging for other attacks, right? So all of this, for example, a malicious software or a virus can be used to set the stage for hacking later, right? So you put a virus that maybe um, opens a TCP port that wasn't open before, and that TCP port can be used by a hacker to hack into a system. So all of these can be combined to perform a bigger attack, right? So they're not all of these attacks, they're not isolated. They don't necessarily be isolated. So if somebody uses malware, that doesn't mean they're not using something else. They can be combining multiple tools to achieve a target. So I think of this as multiple ways to hack into a system. A Trojan horse comes from the Greek mythology. It's a virus that's hiding itself as a nice software. Maybe you download software that does something harmless, like maybe even cleaning other viruses, but then by itself, it's actually a malicious software. You can download free software that does something like a free word processor, right? You download it, and it's free editor, and that's nice. But then that free editor is actually doing something harmful in the background. We call these Trojan horses. I mentioned keystroke loggers. These are they just listen for keyboard and record every keyboard stroke that the user types. If you think about it, the user type a lot of things, including bank accounts, um, passwords, sensitive information in messages, emails, and instant messages, all of that. And this information can be used by hackers. The hacker can go later using other means and retrieve these files, they retrieve these logs, and they can use them to do further harm. Spyware um, spyware monitor can collect um, list of information launched. Let's say you have something that listens to every application you activate in your system, right? You go and start Microsoft Excel, you start email, you start a web browser. It listens to all of this and records everything you do. It can also record, take screen captures, record conversations using activates the microphone, activates the webcam, and basically spies on everything you do. Adware, it looks at your patterns. You go to a browser and you visit different sites, and all of a sudden you find that everywhere you go, there are ads popping up trying to sell you something. Right? It could be based on your access of information of access of websites, and could be just trying to target you with ads so that they force you to eventually buy something, right? Or maybe you make a mistake and trigger or click on one of these ads. Rootkit's actually one of those really uh, harmful harmful viruses out there. Operating systems usually run at multiple layers. The core layer is the kernel, which are most secure. All of the applications that you run on an operating system run in a user space, right? Including viruses. A virus is installed even without your knowledge, but still runs as an application like any other application. So eventually you can, if you detect it and you have the software, the tools for it, you can remove the viruses. Rootkits go beyond that and position themselves in the kernel, in the core itself, which means that the kernel in operating system manages everything, manages the memory, manages the device interaction, manages the applications. So if the virus goes into the kernel, that becomes really hard to get rid of. So they call these rootkits. They are viruses that target the kernel. And they can also, the harm from rootkits, they can hide themselves very well, right? Because users usually don't access the kernel, the core of the operating system, even administrators. A logic bomb is a virus that triggered not by running a software or opening a file like we did before, but by timing, right? Or by specific specific action, specific event. Sometimes there are known viruses in the past where they are triggered at specific time, specific day, right? So before that, they're not detected because they're not doing anything. So they keep replicating, and moving from one computer to another, and people are not aware of them until specific date where all the viruses in all computers start doing harm at the same time. This is more of a mass destruction, uh, device, because um, normally viruses are detected, people are aware of them, they tell each other that there are viruses, so they look for them, they get rid of them. But they happen to activate all at the same time, so there is no prior warnings. They can also be triggered by event, like you go to a specific URL, for example, or send a specific email with a specific keyword, right? Trapdoors and backdoors are software. I gave you an example before, like a virus that opens a TCP port, right? So that opens the door for a hacker to come later and use that TCP port to hack into the system, right? Or a virus that actually it changes some or creates an administrator account without the user's knowledge, and later the hacker comes and use that account to have administrator access to a system. More malware types. A dialer is a program that automatically dials certain numbers or certain list of numbers, and they keep dialing until somebody responds, right? So when somebody responds, they know that there is a legitimate phone number or legitimate IP address. So you can apply it for phones, you can apply it for IP addresses as well. They just randomly ping or randomly check dial until somebody answers. A URL injector if you know HTTP has commands get and set, right? So these can be used to retrieve information normally, but you can also use URL injectors to you go to a website, an unsuspected user go to a website, and the URL injector actually leads you to another website. So in your mind, you are going to my.del.ca, while in fact you are getting a fake Dell website. It looks the same, designed very well to look the same, and you start, first of all, you put your username and password, right, to gain access to your information, and that username and password go somewhere else, go to the attacker, right? Exploits are forms of malware designed to take advantage of flaws in programming, right? Not all developers are careful, and not all developers are or they write good code. So sometimes application developers, make mistakes, and those mistakes allow hackers to exploit those mistakes, vulnerabilities we call them, and they use them to hack into the system. One of the most common mistakes is, especially in languages that doesn't have a lot of checks. C, for example, you can allocate memory for an array of 100 items. What happens if you access 101, the item 101? You get you actually see it by itself does not say no. It simply goes and accesses the wrong memory. So if the user does not check the index of the array and make sure that the index always within the range, allowed range, the hackers, any mistake can allow the hacker to access unauthorized piece of the memory, unauthorized region of the memory. So this could be exploited if the hacker knows about this flaw. It could be exploited. So accessing item 101 could actually allow a piece of code put precisely on that memory location to be executed, right? And it can be simply go to an instruction, a simply code that says go to another address, which will take you to another application, which could be a virus, right? Spam is any unwanted and unsolicited message that you receive. We have a lot of them received all the time. Just go and check your spam folder, and you will find a lot of spams. They are endless. Spam by itself is more of an annoyance rather than malicious. People do spam for many reasons. One of them could be trying to sell you something, and they, by sending spams to thousands and millions of people, maybe some people by mistake click, or even intentionally they'll say, okay, yeah, this is a cheap drug. Yeah, I'm gonna buy it. Um, uh, so they may it makes it profitable for them, sending millions for cost them nothing, but eventually even 1 in 1,000 of those millions reply. That's profit for them. So spam could be done for financial reasons. It could be done also to send phishing attacks. Phishing attacks are the where you get an email that uh, tricks you into doing something compromising, giving your private information, accessing a web or accessing a bank account or something like that. It could be also used to deposit viruses. You send spam. You may click on the link on the spam, and that link will lead you to a website that downloads a virus into your system. It could be used for a lot of things. So we don't like spams in general. Okay, so these are all types of malware, and we're gonna look at some of them um, in a lab. Now we're gonna take a look at some definitions of attacks, right? These are, think of them as not isolated attacks, but mostly as definitions of attacks, right? So what I mean by that is all of these can be used in one attack, right? I can use eavesdropping for reconnaissance, what we talked about earlier. So we do eavesdropping. So this is a definition of eavesdropping. We'll talk about definitions here, right? Um, we'll we will classify the attacks later into passive and active, but for now we'll just look at the definitions of each one of these. So eavesdropping is unauthorized listening to data or voice. In the old days, where communication happened over phones, somebody may spy on you by listening to any conversation you have. So, and you are not aware of this. The conversation happened. In the days of analog phones, somebody can go to a close by um, circuit and just tap into the wires, physically tap into the wires and listening to conversation. Um, Nowadays, you may actually do this by listening to network, tapping into a network links and copying packets and listening to packets. Data packets or voice packets doesn't matter. So listening to information without authorization, we'll call it eavesdropping. We do think of maybe it's not as easy as this, but if you are using a Wireshark and listening to a port and capturing all the traffic on that port and storing it, so you can use sniffers to do this. Any data that you send as a plain text, unencrypted, it's vulnerable to eavesdropping, right? So if it's encrypted, people can store it, can listen to it, but you cannot see it, you cannot know it, because the data is encrypted. But any plain text information, including voice, can be listened to, right, or can be saved and analyzed and can be stored, right? If the eavesdropper, the hacker, just listens to information and collects information, which by itself is harmful, it's not benign, it's not but it can be just listening to information, collects information. What they can do actually, another type of attack, is to replay that information again. So what is the harm of replaying? Okay, so it depends. Let's say a legitimate client is accessing a server, right? And the attacker will collect all this information and save it, and then go and copy this information to 10 devices and replay the same sequence of packets again in 10 devices. So now the server is getting 10 times the amount of traffic that used to get, and of course it's getting busier. So you can think of it as a denial of service attack, because now the server is slowed down and it's busier than usual, right? All right, so that's one type of replay attack. Another type, let's say the client is sending instruction to a server, to a bank, that says, give me $10,000 or transfer amount of $10,000 from one account to another. The hacker get this information and send it multiple times. So every time the server will transfer $10,000, maybe by modifying the packets a little bit, we can send the $10,000 to another bank account, the hacker's bank account, right? This type of attack uses information stored earlier and play it again, right? One way to do this is by attaching information that can be used to discover if this is original or a replay attack. So if I use, for example, sequence numbers or timestamps, if I timestamp my packet with this time, this day, and the attacker cannot use them 5 minutes later or 5 days later because the timestamp won't match. I can use also random numbers in communication. So the server will continuously send random number to the client. The client will reply in terms of challenge response. So the server will send, okay, here is a random number, encrypted with the encryption key that we agreed upon earlier, and send it back to me. So if it's a legitimate client, the client will encrypt it and the server will be able to decrypt the number and find that the actual encryption is correct, because they both have the same keys and the same encryption algorithm, right? If you are sending this challenge to a hacker, the hacker does not know the encryption key, so they won't be able to do this. So there are ways to mitigating the replay attack, and modern protocols, sometimes they have mechanism to prevent replay attacks. But replay attacks still legitimate for a lot of, or still a problem for a lot of legitimate protocols, including, for example, SNMP protocol that's used for network management. It's known to version 1, version 2 don't have any encryption at all, so, and we use them for management, so the attack can use these SNMP packets and replay them to get more information, or just trick the server into keeping it busy, right? Okay, in both cases, in the case of, let's say the case of eavesdropping, the hacker here intercepts the packet without actually changing anything, right? So it just intercepts the packet, listening to them, collects information, but doesn't do anything beyond that. It may use them later to do a replay attack, but in man-in-the-middle attacks, actually the hacker manages to put themselves in the way between the client and the server, or between the two nodes. So now the client, instead of talking to the server directly, it's indirectly and unknowingly is actually talking to the hacker, right? So the harm of this happened because now the client will send the information to the hacker. The hacker has the possibility and the ability to modify the packets and sending them to the server. The server can go back and send data to the hacker. The hacker can modify the packets again and send the response to the client. And it's like you are sending message to your friend, but instead of going directly to your friend, somebody actually pretends to be your friend and use this messages between you and your friend to drive a wedge between you, right? So you say hello to your friend, that person intercepts the message and tells your friend, we need to break up, buddy. And um, yeah, and this you can imagine all sort of drama that can happen in this way. Uh, so hackers can do this by, for malicious reasons, of course, modify um, bank account numbers, modify uh, dollar amounts, modify messages, create all sort of things. But the question here is how hacker can fool the client and the server into thinking that they are actually the legitimate target. So they have to pretend to be somebody else. That's what we call masquerading or spoofing, right? So there are many types of spoofing or masquerading. Um, so one of them is ARP spoofing. We know that the client sends an ARP request. The ARP request is used to translate an IP address to a MAC address, right? Because communication happened in the network using the MAC, not the IP address. So the client sends ARP request as a broadcast that says, whoever has this IP address, please give me your MAC. The legitimate server will send a unicast ARP reply saying, hey, I am the owner of this IP address and here is my MAC. But the hacker can actually send an ARP reply. Anybody can send an ARP reply because the ARP request is broadcast. So anybody can send an ARP reply saying, hey, I am the owner of this IP address and here is my MAC. And if they manage to send it quickly enough, faster than the original server, or if they can somehow block the original server from sending their unicast message, they can fool the client into thinking that they are legitimate, the server, and of course the client will start sending packets using the MAC address of the hacker. Right? Um, MAC spoofing is actually even easier. MAC spoofing, you can every Ethernet card has a built-in manufacturer MAC, but a lot of operating systems allow you to change the MAC address. Just change the MAC address to anything you want. So I can put a server in the same network as the legitimate server and change the MAC address to match the MAC address of the server, and now it become um, uh, the server, right? And if the hacker manages to block the legitimate service from working, or maybe make it busy a little bit by targeting it with the denial of service attack, I can, replace it. DNS poisoning. Okay, so if I want to communicate to a network external, so ARP and MAC will work for internal networks. You can spoof the gateway or using ARP spoofing and MAC spoofing as well. So you can put a gateway, a fake router in your network, illegitimate router, and you can spoof the actual router so you can direct all your traffic to the hacker's router, which can direct your net traffic anywhere they want, right? But I can spoof also outside devices by DNS poisoning. As you know, if I want to go to a specific URL, my.dell.ca, my device will first check with the DNS server to find the actual IP address of the device. If the hacker can plant a wrong record that translates the fully qualified domain name, the URL, into another IP address that's not the legitimate Dell IP address, and then the client unknowingly send all traffic to the fake website, right? So DNS poisoning or even DNS spoofing. So instead of just putting a illegitimate DNS record in the DNS server, I can even replace the entire DNS server with another one, right? So I can put a fake DNS server which will direct traffic to anywhere the hacker wants by manipulating the DNS records, right? ICMP redirect, you know that ICMP has multiple messages. The famous ones are echo and echo reply, but there are also the ICMP redirect, which is usually sent by a router that says if the client sends, if a node sends traffic to the router may send ICMP redirect back to the client saying use a different router, more efficient maybe. So that's ICMP redirect. A hacker can manage to send ICMP redirects, so that causes the client to send their traffic to another router, the hacker's router, and use different route. Proxy manipulation. So proxies are devices that are legitimately supposed to be between the client and servers. They're supposed to protect both clients and servers. We'll talk about this in a future lecture, but proxies provide a barrier between the client and servers. Sometimes we put them on the client network to protect the clients. Sometimes we put them on the server networks to protect the servers. Either way, the proxy sits in between the client and server and legitimately looks at all the traffic or intercepts all the traffic between the client server and servers. So that's the legitimate use for proxies. The hackers can manipulate the proxies so they can hack into the proxy, and they can, once they hack into the proxy, now they are playing the man in the middle attack again by going into a proxy and just intercepting all the traffic and manipulate the legitimate function of the proxy into something that they want, right? Another attack which facilitates man in the middle attack is a rogue DHCP server, right? So DHCP is the protocol that assigns dynamic IP or assigns IP address dynamically to devices. If the hacker puts a rogue DHCP server, and that DHCP server will assign IP addresses to clients, I can do a few things. DHCP doesn't send IP addresses, just send IP addresses. They have the ability to also provide information to the clients, like what is the gateway and what is the DNS. So I can manipulate the client into thinking the gateway is different gateway, the DNS is a different DNS, or sometimes I do things like deny giving clients addresses at all. Maybe this is not for a middle man-in-the-middle attack, but for different types of attacks. So rogue DHCP servers can be used in different ways. Rogue wireless access point, same thing. Everybody wants to connect to a wireless network. They have to go through an access point. If the the hacker managed to replace a legitimate wireless access point with a rogue one, or simply put another one nearby with a more power. So your client, your phone, your laptop will detect more power access points. Say, this is a nice one, has more power, I'm going to connect to it, right? And once your traffic goes to the access point, so that's where the hacker gets hold of all of the traffic and they can do whatever they want with it. So all of these, again, I want to emphasize that all of these are definitions of different, not necessarily attacks, but different tools for attacks, right? Session hijacking is sort of replacing, instead of sitting between the client and server, we are replacing the client altogether, or sometimes we are replacing the server altogether. So the hacker listens to the traffic between the client and server for a while, gathers enough information, then they actually replace the session. They go into the, now you know from the TCP sessions that there are sequence numbers. There are, first of all, there is the three-way handshake, and then there is a sequence number and windows and all of this. TCP has all of this information. The hacker, well, it's not an easy task to just replace one session to another. So the hacker needs to collect enough information about the session and then insert themselves by cutting off the client and then continuously or continue the session with the server as if they are the original client. And now the server, either side, either the client or the server, will think that they are talking to the legitimate end node while they are actually talking to the hacker. So the client will lose the session. If the client is removed, the client will know that it's lost the session. Doesn't know it's a hacker, just knows that it disconnected from the server. The server will not know, so it will continue communicating with the hacker. So session hijacking has to happen as a second or third step after spoofing, after maybe the other two attacks. Maybe start by doing listening first or eavesdropping, then man in the middle, which require some kind of spoofing, and then finally replacing the client altogether. So all of these are, you cannot just do session hijacking right away. You have to do the other things. That's why I'm saying think of these as different ways or different tools of performing an attack. Now we're looking at spoofing again in more detail. I think I provided enough detail, but in general, spoofing is falsification of information. So that's a general term. It can be, you can receive an email that says, instructor X at Dell.ca, while it's not actually coming from the instructor. Somebody is pretending to be, right? So that's email spoofing. You can spoof IP address by configuring your device for a specific IP that you know it's a server IP, and then you use it to pretend to be a server. You can use you can spoof MAC addresses. Generally speaking, spoofing is difficult to prevent because the network allows us to do this. I can configure a static IP address, any static IP address on my laptop, right? Nobody's gonna prevent me from doing that, not directly anyways. I mean, we can learn how to prevent these things. That's what we need to do in this course. But you cannot prevent a user from changing IP address. You cannot prevent, or hard to prevent, the user from changing the MAC address on their NIC card. So these are, it requires a little bit of effort from the security perspective to prevent these things from happening. Denial of service attack happens, or we hear it in the news very often. It happens a lot. Denial of service attacks target the availability of the infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily grab any information. It tries to prevent a service from being delivered to a user, right? I can say a server, or I can say infrastructure in general, right? So I can target a web server continuously to prevent it from serving legitimate users. I can target, or the hacker can target a company that sells products online to prevent them from selling products. So there are the denial of service attack and the distributed denial of service attack, which DOS and DDoS, right? The idea is the same. The difference is just denial of service usually comes from one source, while distributed comes from many, many sources. But the idea is there are two ways to perform denial of service attacks. One is by exploiting some vulnerability in the software, make it crash, right? Make the software crash. Crashing, freezing, rebooting, anything that prevents it from working. So I'll give you some common example. A TCP requires a three-way handshake. So before any TCP session is established, the client sends the first message, which is SYN. So let's pretend we have a client and server here. So this is a client, this is a server, and the first message, as you know, SYN, the client send it to a port 80, for example. The server will send ACK, acknowledgement, and SYN, which are flags in the TCP header, by the way, right? And the client will send a final acknowledgement, and that will continue, the session will continue until there is a finish and acknowledge. And sometimes we need also another finish from the server part. An acknowledgement. Okay, so that's the regular TCP session. The client can simply, to perform a denial of service attack, can simply send the first sync. So the server sends the acknowledgement, and then the client does not send the third message. So in this case, the server will start waiting for the sync, for the acknowledgement to come. And in this case, the server actually doesn't have a complete session open yet. It has half open or partially open, but that consumes resources. So the server has to keep track of all the sessions, right? All the TCP sessions. It has to allocate memory. It has to keep track of the sequence number, keep track of the windows, all of these things that that has been studied in the TCP protocol. So in this case, we are consuming resources at the server side, but there is no establishment of the session yet. If the client start doing this more and more, the same client sending, maybe using a trick that changes the IP address just to fool the server further. So now I have multiple sessions open, but not complete yet, partially established, not completely established yet. Right? The server, any server, will have a limited capacity of the number of sessions that can be ongoing at the same time. It doesn't matter. It depends on the type of device. Some really IoT devices can hold maybe only one session open at a time, right? Or one client at a time. They can handle one client. I'm not going to say session, I'm going to say client. So they can handle only one client at a time. So if that client, if we do this part, right, and the attacker will just hold this server busy, and the server will not be able to serve any other clients. Now, most server will be able to handle multiple, maybe thousands of clients at the same time. So the more the client create these incomplete sessions, the more busy the server becomes and less likely to serve more clients until they cannot serve any more clients. So now the client, the legitimate clients cannot access the servers anymore, right? All right, so that's one form of exploitation. There are other forms. We can use buffer flowing. I'll talk about it later, to crash the server altogether. So make sure that the application go beyond certain bounds and they crash. It doesn't work anymore and needs rebooting. It needs time to reboot, or maybe crashes altogether and doesn't come back. So that's one type. Another type is just by overwhelming the server with traffic. If I send packets, I can overwhelm the server with a lot of bandwidth that it cannot do anything. It cannot handle a lot of traffic. So no matter how big the network is, it still has a limited bandwidth, and probably the server has a limited number of packets that can handle at any given time, right? So if the hacker manages to send a lot of packets toward that server, or toward that, not necessarily server, it could be also a router or a switch. So if the hacker can manage to send a lot of packets to overwhelm the device, or overwhelm the link itself can be overwhelmed by making sure that there's a huge utilization that it cannot. Now the packets start dropping, the congestion occurs, so we cannot serve clients anymore, cannot serve packets anymore. So that's another type directed towards the links. Denial of service, or usually generating a lot of packets, cannot be done by a single client, right? Devices are not able to generate a huge amount of packets. So that leads us to distributed denial of service attack, where the attacker will hire or employ a lot of devices, and each device will go and either establish partial session, as I mentioned earlier, or just send a lot of traffic, right? So how does DDoS happen? Well, remember all these malware that we talked about, and all of those techniques that we talked about in infiltrating. So the hacker can prepare for this by going and infiltrating devices that are not very well secure, Nowadays, there are a lot of devices. We have IoT devices, internet, smart everything, smart fridges, smart plugs, smart light bulbs. All of these are devices that have a full TCP/IP stack because they need to communicate with the IP, but they may not have very well secure um, software. And also, there are a lot of laptops and phones and other devices that are not well secured either. So the hackers may go and try to uh, install malicious software in all of these devices, all kind of devices, simple or sophisticated. And that software, those viruses, those malicious software, they are programmed so that at any given moment, the attacker will give them a command, and the command will tell them to launch an attack against the target. So we will call these things botnets, right? So the DDoS attacks rely on agents or bots or zombies. These are different names, and the botnets are the collection of those devices, right? So we have a botnet, we have a collection of devices that have these um, malicious software or infected with malicious software, and they're not aware. The devices are not aware. The users are not aware. And of course, if you are targeting these smart devices, the smart devices may not be aware that they have malicious software in them. And then these malicious agent, they usually listen to um, some commands from a communication server. There were some free chat servers like IRC that commonly used to launch these attacks. Some other communications, they could simply use any other messaging platform to launch an attack, right? So the attack can come from all of these sources targeted toward one target. Distributed denial of service attacks are harder to protect against than denial of service attacks because the administrator can know or can see that the traffic is coming from one source, one IP address, so they can block it, right? Or even if it's coming from one network, they can block the entire network. Here, this comes from a lot of sources, so it's a lot easier, a lot more difficult to block. We talked about social engineering before, so social engineering is the art of manipulating people into performing tasks or releasing information that violates security. Takes different forms. I gave you an example of fake FedEx or Amazon or whatever employees, so they can go and talk to receptionist or security guard and trying to manipulate them into given information, right? It could also come into form of text message or website or email that compels you or tricks you into given information. Usually, social engineering hackers who use social engineering, they try to impersonate somebody, either authority. Somebody comes with wearing a suit and a tie and walks into a company and pretend to be an important customer and demand to see the salesperson or the account administrator of that specific X company because they have an important complaint, right? So they receptionist thinks, oh, we're going to do his business. I better call somebody right away because this is angry customer, and if I don't treat him well, we're going to lose business. So anyway, this is a kind of thing that social engineering hackers do. It could be also impersonating an insider. Somebody comes pretending to be an employee in the company and talk to another employee and start maybe trash talking the CEO, and the other guy, the victim, maybe has some concern, so start talking about the CEO and yeah, he's away all the time, or he comes only on Thursdays, and this is information that the hacker can use, right? So all kind of things that people can use to get information from victims. Okay, so in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about certain software vulnerabilities that allows the hackers to launch attacks. So the next few slides are about software vulnerabilities and software attacks. The first kind of these attacks is called the insertion attacks. Insertion attacks usually exploit some feature of either the software, the language, the programming language, or the shell commands of the operating system, or anything like that, to insert unauthorized content, right? So there are a couple of examples that I can describe. One of them is the common something called SQL injection. SQL is domain-specific language. If you are familiar with databases, relational databases, SQL is used to insert or retrieve information from relational databases, right? So knowing how this language work, the hacker can add more content to the legitimate command to actually bypass security restrictions and maybe grab more information than what they should, right? What they need. All right. So let me give you an example of SQL injection, just to illustrate the point here. All right. So a typical SQL command will look like this. Select star, which means everything, from users. Users in this case is a table, right? So if you issue a command like this, select anything from users, what will happen? You will get all the records, all the information from the tables. Imagine you have a table called users, and it has columns, name, sorry about the handwriting here, name, salary, age, employee record, employee number, and other information, right? So if I write select all from users, means select all the columns, all the rows from the users table, right? To make it more secure, the administrator can add where, it's a condition, where username equal some name, and password equal some password as well. Right? So this will be a restriction. Now here the table may have a column that says username, and password. Right? So this means that I'm selecting only the records of specific user with a specific password, right? So maybe just one record. So in this case, any administrator or any user who is issuing this command to the database will be able only to retrieve information about himself or herself, because they are only people who know the username and password, right? If another user will have a different username and different password, so if I want to get information about somebody else other than me, I have to know their password, which I want. I can't, right? So the hacker, or in this case, the hacker can use a trick in the command here and add extra thing, insert extra thing that will change the meaning of this. So one way to do this is to change this by adding something like or I'm doing this from memory, so I may actually forget the actual syntax, but the idea is the same. So simply inserting extra command there at the end. So what happens in this case? It happens that makes the whole thing is true. The condition is always true, right? Because this is true, right? And anything or true is true. So this means that the hacker will retrieve all the information, not just a single user, but the whole thing, right? Just by inserting an extra command here, or extra pieces of information, right? So that's a simple example of SQL injection. There are also other types of injections. Use Linux, for example, Linux shell commands. With Linux shell commands, you know that, for example, I can say ls, which gives me the directory of a folder. But I can concatenate multiple commands in one line. So the hacker may actually hack or add something that's supposed to be like echo, for example, right? And that will the legitimate command is just one, but the hacker adds this, so every time this command is executed, this command is also executed. In this case, the two commands are benign, they don't do anything, but you may actually reveal information using the echo or reveal the information using the ls. So these are the type of insertions that the hacker can use, manipulate. We'll call them insertion attacks, right? I can also do insertion attacks by inserting a illegitimate routing entry in the routing table of a router. That's another type of insertion. When we talk about intrusion detection systems, they can fool the intrusion detection system into thinking there's actually attack while there's no attack, so the intrusion detection system will start or intrusion prevention system in this case starts dropping packets, start blocking networks because it assumes that there is an attack while there isn't. Another type of attacks that target vulnerabilities in systems, fragmentation attacks. You know that IP addresses can be fragmented, IP packets can be fragmented, and when we fragment the IP packet, so an IP packet can be fragmented by, if it doesn't pass through a network, it can be fragmented by a router. So this is the original IP packet with an IP header. When it's fragmented, it's supposed to go one fragment, and this is the original IP header with an extra fragment information here that tells me the offset, right? Offset is 0, and then take the other fragment from here to here and attach another IP, a copy of the IP header with a fragment offset of, let's say, 128, and so on, multiple fragments with an IP address, IP header, and which includes the address, of course, and the offset. That's the normal operation, right? If the hacker can actually exploit this by changing the offsets here. So instead of the size of the original packet, maybe let's assume it's 1200 bytes, right? Which when you add all of these packets should be 1200 bytes. If the hacker manipulates the offset and make this offset is 800, and this is the offset becomes 100 and 1200, right? And each one of these originally has 400 bytes. So now the destination will add all of this, and the resultant, well, first of all, it's confusing because there's empty space here. We have the first 400 bytes, and then there's nothing for 400, and then the offset is 800. So if you add things up, the header or the destination will receive a much larger packet than the original packet, which is 1200. It will receive a much larger packet by manipulating these offsets. So that will confuse the destination, cause it maybe to crash, cause it to manipulate the packet in a different way. It will cause damage, right? So manipulating offsets, or could do the opposite by making the offsets overlap, right? So this is a 400 bytes and make the offset here 200, which means that this part here is supposed to be assembled in the middle, which means there are overlapping bytes, right? Okay, so that's fragmentation attack. Another type of attack is called buffer overflow. I mentioned this earlier. A buffer overflow happens when the software developers create, for example, an array, and the array has elements. Each element will have an index 0, 1, 2, and so on. So this is an array of 100 elements. 100 elements. So let's say this is called array. If I access the array with the index 100, that will be out of range. So that could mean that I am exceeding the amount of memory that allocated to this data, right? I'm going beyond. Buffer. This is just one example of buffer overflows. There are many other examples. I give you another example where, let's say, you are trying to insert a name into a field, and the name is supposed to be 50 characters long, right? But in the website, let me go back to it. So the website gives me a form and says your name and the field. The field look like it's supposed to be maybe 50 characters or so. And in the background, in the application, there is a name, variable name, and it's supposed to be also saved in a string of 50 characters long, right? But the software developer or the web developer didn't actually restrict the amount of characters that you can enter in this field. So the hacker can simply put 100 characters in this name field, and when the software tried to take this content of this field and assign it to this variable, it will crash or it will create an exception or something in the background, because this field cannot carry more than 50 characters. The developers failed to sanitize the content, make sure that it doesn't really exceed 50 characters before it assigned it to a variable in the background. So there are many examples of this. Cross-site scripting, this is something that an attacker can use to attack a third party, right? So let me give you an example again with a website. So in this example that I mentioned, the victim, who's the victim? The victim is the server that displays this web page, right? So in the background there is a piece of software, maybe takes the names and information about the customer and saves it in a database. If the hacker puts a larger name there, so what happens is the server maybe will crash. But there are also the cross-site attack where, let's say, you are going to a website where there are products. You buy this product and then you make a comment. So the product is a nice laptop, and there are comments here, user comments or customer comments. So the user has a form that will put their comments. This is a nice product, 5 stars, whatever. Right? Right? And I bought this product and it looks nice and everything works and etc. etc. So that comment will be saved. So it will be saved. So this is the entry, this is the input, the original input. and this will be saved in the comments section. So other users, other customers will come and look at your comments here and say, okay, this is a nice product, I'm going to buy it. Right? Now, if the developer is not careful, the attacker may actually, instead of putting legitimate comments here, they will put a code. Again, you need to know exactly what you're doing, so you may put a code that display or execute a command. So instead of writing a just simple comment, I may execute a command cd I don't know, user something slash ls or semicolon ls, right? Change the folder to user and display all the files in that folder, right? Something like that. Now, this is maybe not very harmful, but it may so this comment will go and saved in the comment section. So the hacker put this comment, which is not legit, just a commands, and the website will store this comment in the comment section. Another user will visit this website, and what happened? This command will execute in their website, in their client, in their web browser, or in their machine. And whatever commands are written here, they will be executed in their machine. And that could be used to reveal some secrets. Let's say I am revealing the session number of the user, right? Every user, when goes to a website, they get a session number, so the web server tracks their actions. They track whatever products they put in the cart. They track their information, all of this. So I may reveal this information to a hacker. So a unsuspecting user may go to a website and they get subjected to hacking. So this is what we call cross-site scripting, and this is a simple way of explaining it. Right. I mentioned earlier that in the past, the common type of attack is just stealing something that financially profitable, credit card information, something that I can change to cash, or something that I can sell, like medical information or email addresses, account numbers, whatever I can sell to somebody for money, right? So, but there are more and more type of attacks that are long term. People are not interested in making a quick money or quick profit. They just want to, maybe they have other reasons, political reasons, military reasons, espionage. They wanna go there and hack a system and stay there for a long time. So we call these advanced persistent threats, right? And these are low level. The user goes, or the hacker goes, and make sure that they don't they're not discovered easily, right? They plan and they do things for a long term, right? We're gonna stop at this. I just want to define the term. We're not gonna go into how. Usually we use all the kind of techniques that we talked about earlier, but we stay there for a long term. Okay, so in the next set of slides, we're going to talk about specific attacks targeted at networks and how to mitigate them. So we divide these attacks into data plane, control plane, and management plane. So data plane obviously is concerned with moving data, while control plane is making sure that we know where to forward the data, we know where to forward the packets, and the management is concerned about the management of the devices themselves, right, and monitoring them. So common network threats that attack the data plane is we talked about some of them, like ARP spoofing and DHCP server spoofing. So I'm not going to repeat that, but something else, VLAN hopping, for example. So we know that VLANs, packets that carry VLAN tags, they go through trunks, which identify the VLANs by a tag on the packet. And we trust that VLANs can be, or the packets can be targeted or forwarded to appropriate VLANs, right? If the hacker goes and change the VLAN tag midway, now a packet that comes from VLAN 100 can be passed to a VLAN 120, right? So that can be done by just manipulating the VLAN tags. MAC flooding. You know that switches will have a limited, learn MAC or learn how to forward packets by learning their MAC addresses and creating MAC table. You know where the MAC is coming from, so next time a packet directed to that MAC will be forwarded to that specific port based on the MAC table. If the switch does not have an entry in the MAC table, the packet will be flooded into all ports, right? So if somebody attacks the switch by just sending a lot of bogus MAC addresses, eventually the MAC table will be full and won't accept any more MAC addresses. So any other packet coming from any other legitimate source will be flooded. And flooding is harmful to the network, so everything will be flooded everywhere, right? Instead of actually making the forwarding or optimizing the forwarding by learning the MAC addresses. We talked about MAC address spoofing. DHCP starvation. This happens when you actually make a lot of fake DHCP requests to the point that you exhaust all the IP addresses. So next up, so you have a network of the DHCP pool is 100 IP addresses, right? And one DHCP client sends 99 requests, right? Or even 50. It doesn't have to be 99, any large number. So now instead of having 100 IP addresses to share, the DHCP has less. So some clients won't be able to connect to the network because they won't be able to get an IP address. Another thing that I discovered in practice is that you can actually make the lease be very long, to the point that a temporary user comes to a guest user connects to the network and gets an IP address. The IP address should be leased for hours, but instead you make it leased for a month, right? So because the first few guests will take IP addresses, and the IP addresses will be leased for a long time, a new guest will come and they won't find any IP addresses left, because those who are leased, the lease will not be over for a long time. So that's another way of doing DHCP starvation. DHCP server spoofing, we talked about it. ARP spoofing, also we talked about it. IP spoofing, again, you can change the IP address on your device any way you want, right? So how do we mitigate? Usually don't define or don't allow unused VLANs to exist in your network. So you you disable all unused ports, and if you enable VLANs on trunks, you enable only the VLANs that you don't enable all the VLANs. By default, all VLANs are enabled, all trunks, which means that any VLAN tag will go. But if you enable only specific VLANs that are used in your network, then any other VLANs will not be able to pass through trunks. Disable trunking, right? So that ports can be used as access mode only if they are going to one device, right? Disable automatic trunk negotiation. So usually I don't allow trunk negotiation. Make sure that everything is configured both sides. I don't use the automatic VLAN configuration in any device. Everybody knows that all devices has VLAN 1 configured by default, so don't use it, or don't use it for network management at least. So don't use it at all. Configure other VLANs. If you can, create MAC port assignments, right? So if a gateway is connected to port 5 in your switch, that port should be configured to accept only that particular MAC instead of any MAC, right? So if somebody removed the router and put another router, it won't work. That's also the purpose of IEEE 802.1x. It allows only specific MACs to connect to the network, right? So you are configuring a server, so only specific MACs that configure to a network. You can also configure the number of MAC addresses that can appear on each port. So usually an access port will accept only one MAC, right? If 5 MACs comes from the same port, well, there must be something wrong. Now, there could be a legitimate reasons for multiple MAC addresses to come. Maybe somebody took one laptop or one server and put another server. But that usually these MACs, can be cleaned, or the configuration of that particular port can be cleaned so that it can accept a new MAC. For DHCP, you can have a static IP MAC binding. You can still use DHCP, but for every MAC, there's only one IP address assigned, and vice versa. So you cannot continue asking for or generating IP addresses for a lot of devices, or for a single device with multiple MAC addresses. You can snoop DHCP, so monitor all DHCP traffic in the network. So if DHCP coming from untrusted server, you can block it. And there is also something called dynamic ARP inspection that verifies the IP version 4 MAC bindings, and I'm going to leave that to you for doing research. Threats in the control plane, I mentioned one of them, which may be inserting illegitimate IP route in the routing table of a device. There is also STP attacks, STP spoofing. Simply somebody goes to a switch and change the routing, change the priority, make it route. So all the traffic, all the configuration of the spanning tree will change. You can also manipulate STP by creating fake disruption in the network. So every time you disconnect and connect a link, STP has to recalculate. Every time the original STP takes 30 seconds the default 30 seconds to reconfigure. So that's 30 seconds of service interruptions. But you can during this 30 seconds, sessions will drop and records will drop and users can access applications. So that's 30 seconds too long. Yeah. So mitigations always use root guard. So this is a feature that allows the traffic, that allows or prevents a port from becoming an STP root, right? And also port fast guard, which means that the switch port will not communicate, will not receive PPDU STP packet. Every time it receives STP frames, it just disables it. Prevents. You usually do this on the ports that are connected to clients, connected to nodes that are not switches, right? Anything that's not switch is not supposed to participate in STP. So you put a port fast PPDU, it blocks. So it takes out that port from the STP network. Use unicast reverse path forwarding to verify the source information. That's also something that you can use. Make sure that traffic is not coming from two different IPs from two different sources, for example. Or, prevent traffic from the same IP to come from two different sources. Right. Management control planes. That's usually, we call this hardening. Always a good idea to do hardening. So what is hardening means disable all unused protocols. From the security terminology, mentions reducing the attack vector, right? So reducing the area where problems can happen, right? So Telnet is vulnerable. Telnet is not secure protocol. If your switch is capable of handling Telnet, that means there is a vulnerability there. So what you do, disable Telnet altogether, right? HTTP, if you don't want to access your device using HTTP, like a router or switch, you don't want to access it using HTTP, disable it. TFTP, disable it. Any protocol that you don't need, just disable it. Use secure protocols. If you want to log in instead of Telnet using SSH, if you want to monitor the network and managing instead of SNMP version 1 and 2, use SNMP version 3. So use secure protocols. If you are managing a device, make sure that the management traffic comes from a specific port, not any port, and from a specific VLAN actually. And as a good practice, you don't mix the management traffic with the user traffic. So if the user traffic on VLAN 500, make sure that the management traffic is on a different VLAN altogether, right? Limit SNMP access. So you, by default, the switch will accept logging or accept SNMP packets from any port, but you can say, or from any server, make sure that, the SNMP is configured so that SNMP packets coming only from one server. Restrict device accessibility to limited staff, right? So you use username and password and authentication and all of that. Restrict the actions and views that are permitted by users. It's not enough that allow users to access the devices, but also prevent them from doing everything. So you can create users that are allowed to access only specific features. Maybe some users can enable and disable ports, but they cannot change the routing table. Some people can monitor traffic, but they are not allowed to change the configuration and so on, right? Use two-factor authentication. We'll talk that in the next lecture, but basically use two means of authenticating instead of just one maybe password and another mean. Use access list to limit traffic coming from only specific network or only specific VLAN. So that's for management. Log everything. Log all access so you can track activities. Minimize information given in the login banners. Remember when we talked about banners and the reconnaissance and scanning? Hackers can look at the banners and get information from them. So limit the information that are given in the banners. Device access, always use the AAA, authentication, authorization, and accountability. So authorization, we'll start with authorization first. So you need to make sure that not everybody in your network security team or network management team access everything. No, different people have different access and privileges, different authorizations. So you can divide the groups into, even yourself, if you are just one administrator, you don't just because you are the administrator, you don't have to access everything using the same administrator account. Maybe use one account for viewing the network data, another account for changing the configuration, a third account for maybe adding or moving users around. So different, so that if one account falls in the hands of a hacker, they don't have everything, right? So that's the authorization. Authentication is the means to control the access. So authentication happens using either something like a username or access card or biometrics, things like that. We'll talk about this in the next lecture, but these are techniques that we need to use to authenticate. Finally, accountability, which happens not just because somebody can do something, that doesn't mean they can do anything they want. If you want to change the configuration, if a administrator can change the configuration on a device, how do you know that they changed the configuration in a legitimate way? So there is an accountability. Accountability happens by tracking the device access and tracking and logging the actions of the users. Every time somebody does something, we keep a log. Right? Okay, we talked about different forms of access. So here, this is we're going to classify them into passive and active attacks. So the way we classify, just think about an easy way to differentiate between attacks, whether passive or active. It's very hard to put a list of every attack out there and say, well, this is passive or this is active. So I'm going to give you just general way to classify them. So if the attack itself, or we'll call it attack or call it action, if the action is not recognizable by the user and does not change anything, right? That we consider that passive attack. Usually, interception or eavesdropping is the big umbrella of passive attacks. Reading somebody's email is passive because you didn't modify it, you didn't change it. It's still bad, but you didn't change anything, right? Traffic analysis. We didn't talk about traffic analysis, but the traffic analysis sometimes is even encrypted data. You can still sniff it and get some information from it. Let's say every time there is an encrypted packet that goes from the user to the bank, right? Or bank A, right? All right. So every month there is a communication between this user and bank A. Now, even though I don't see what the traffic is, but I know that this user has a relationship with bank A. So that's what we mean by traffic analysis. Let's say, well, students have a lot of access to Dell.ca. Now we know that that user is a student of the university, right? A user sends an email or make a phone call to India on a regular basis while they're living in Canada. Okay, we know that they are probably have a family there or they have a relationship there. So that's traffic analysis, right? Even though it's encrypted, even though the user does not see it, does not see the content, but it still provides significant information. So sometimes we need to hide this information as well. But anyways, all of these that does not change anything, we call them passive attacks. Active attacks, they actually make a change, and whether it's noticeable or not noticeable by the users, right? Sometimes they're not noticeable intentionally, like spoofing or middle in the man in the middle attack. They're not noticeable. They're not supposed to be noticeable, but they are. Well, they're there. They're doing harm. They're somebody's changing the normal operation of the network, or the normal operation of the system in general, if we're talking about information systems. So examples: denial of service, message modification, message replay, masquerading. Some students ask me about viruses and malware, whether they are passive and active, and there are somebody arguing that, okay, so maybe a keylogger is a passive something like or the virus is dormant, it doesn't do anything. I would I don't have the right answer, but I would classify all malware as active attacks, maybe with few exceptions, but because eventually they are used to do something harmful, right? As I said before, the harmful thing is not the distinction. I don't. Passive attacks are still attacks. They're still harmful. You're trying to gain information. The distinction is whether you are changing something or not, right? You are actively changing packets, the content of a packet. You are actively changing the route of the packets. You are actively changing the behavior of the system. That's active. While passive is maybe I'm just collecting information, right? So that's the distinction. Now, there is a big industry, cybercrime industry. Criminals are doing this for profits. They're doing this for a long term, not just short term. We're talking about advanced, persistent, or APT threats. So we are looking at this as the threats are becoming more and more significant. They're not just individual hackers. They're looking for quick profit. They are industry, and the industry with business models, and they are selling services. So these slides don't add much to what we said. Just now we are seeing the hackers becoming a big motivated groups of people. We also see the growing attack surface. Growing attack surface. What does that mean? It means that we are not just the target is not just a laptop or a phone or a server. Anything that has internet connection now is a target, right? Smartphones, tablets, IoT sensors, smart um smart devices, smart plugs, smart bulbs, all anything that smart fridge, anything that has smart prefix attached to it. These are actually more vulnerable. So why? Because they're not. Um, in your laptop, there is a firewall in your laptop. You may install an antivirus, but a smart device, it's made to be cheap, is made to be um, easy to install. They don't have a lot of protection, and probably the manufacturer will not spend a lot of money and effort to uh, secure them. So they are vulnerable. Now, even cars can be hacked, right? Um, they run software, right? Uh, door locks, thermostats, you name it, all of these, and they are in millions. They are 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more than laptops and servers. So they are easy target. Even something like your tablet and your phone, it's more easily hackable than your laptop or desktop. Your desktop is sitting in your office or your home, it doesn't change. Your phone is moving everywhere and connecting to whoever network it meets, right? So it goes to a coffee shop, it connects to the network there. Go to a library, you connects during going through, just walking down the street and may connect to a hacker's network there, a wireless network. So they are more vulnerable to attacks, right? So that actually gives rise to the importance of information security and particular network security. So, but we will end the lecture at this point. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next lecture.